On this episode, we talk to linguist Rikker Dockum about the Thai language overlords, the Royal Society.
So if you've wondered why the word for computer is not officially com-pu-TER, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 and who has yet to see a ghost here, despite really wanting to believe all the stories.
I'm with you, man. I'm waiting for my experience. I just haven't had one yet.
TikTok.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 23 years ago, fell in love with all the different things Thai people do to get winning lottery numbers. So I never left.
No doubt. That seagull crapped on your left shoulder. Ooh, left is odd. Let's pick all the odd numbers for the lottery ticket.
That's right.
It's an obsession. It is a national obsession.
Thai people will do basically anything to get winning lottery numbers.
You should go up to Lad Prow to see that demon statue that's been there for the past few days.
Man, that statue's super creepy. We talked about it on the bonus show. So listeners out there, if you want to hear more about this crazy, creepy, giant demon statue that Thai people are making sacrifices to get lottery numbers, you got to become a patron, and you get the bonus show.
Yeah, do not give your cats or dogs up.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please don't do that, even for lottery numbers.
Crazy story.
All right, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about the ultimate nightmare for condo dwellers and Greg's very weird weekend dealing with that, my first week back teaching in university, and the difficulties Greg had in trying to explain Rodney Dangerfield to his 8-year-old son. To learn how to become a patron, click the support button at the top of our website.
No respect.
That's right.
And as always, everyone, remember, if you have a comment, a show idea, or just want to say hi, head to bangkokpodcast.com. Click the little microphone button at the bottom right and leave us a voicemail that we'll play on the show. And before we get to the main show this week, we have two important programming notes to share. Firstly, for those that listen to the show on Spotify, now previously our bonus shows have only been available with a unique URL that you get from Patreon and add to your podcast player. It's a little bit finicky. But now patrons can listen to the regular show and our bonus show on Spotify. So if you search for the special Bangkok Podcast show on Spotify with the subtitle Badass Patrons Only and add that to your library, you'll notice some little padlock icons next to each episode. Tap on the padlock, link your Spotify account with your Patreon account, and bam, all the episodes are unlocked and you can listen on Spotify.
Nice.
So that's really cool. Yeah, that's really cool if you're a patron, or if you want to be a patron and you listen to Spotify, that's another avenue for you to listen. So that's really cool.
Nice.
And second, you might remember from season 5, episode 16, we had a guest on our good buddy Derek Van Pelt, who was talking about entrepreneurism in Thailand and the ins and outs of doing business in the kingdom. Derek's just launched a new Substack newsletter called Mekong Memo, a curated snapshot of Southeast Asia's dynamic business landscape that delivers news, legal, economic, and other relevant updates directly into your inbox. Now, Derek has generously offered our listeners a 30-day free subscription to the newsletter, which includes news from Thailand as well as Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. If you'd like to join, head to mekongmemo.com/BPC for Bangkok Podcast and click the Start Free Trial button on the bottom. That's it. It's a great way to keep up with all the important news in the region and a really cool service by our buddy Derek. So make sure to check that out.
Very cool.
All right, on this episode, we welcome back one of the oldest and definitely handsomest friends of the show, our old pal, linguist Rikker Dockum. Now, longtime listeners may remember Rikker as the Thai language Jedi we had on a number of shows back in season 1 before he moved back to the US. So I was happy to trap him in a room with a microphone on one of his recent visits to Thailand to talk about an interesting element of learning Thai, and that is the Royal Society, which oversees the planning and regulation of the Thai language. Now, for speakers of English, it might seem weird to have a government body in charge of overseeing an entire language and how it develops, which is probably why I'm down with that and I'm up for that, mean the same thing, but I digress. Anyway, Thailand is not entirely unique in this regard, but there are some interesting facts and quirks of keeping the Thai language between the guardrails in a rapidly modernizing world, and that's what we talk about here. So here is my interview with our pal, Rikker Dockum. Well, I'm very happy to be sitting down with one of our old friends, one of my old personal friends, and one of the podcast's oldest friends from way back in our early days of 2010 when we were in season 1, Rikker Dockum. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back again.
Hey, you have an open invite to come on whenever you are in town, and you are in town visiting, so I managed to shoehorn my way into your busy schedule and get you to sit down with me for a little while. So,
yeah, glad to do it.
I really wanted to talk about something with you, which I've sort of been noodling around in my brain for a while. And over the past few months, I've been reading several articles very randomly, although the algorithm is probably feeding me something from behind the scenes. And it was all about how English is changing and shifting and adapting to modern trends and technology. And I started to wonder that about Thailand. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about that with you, specifically about the Royal Institute, because something that's unique about Thailand is that it has an official body which, as I understand it, is set up to sort of guide and influence and sort of dictate where and how Thai language evolves. But I really don't know much more than that, so I thought it would be really cool to talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What is the Thai Institute, the Royal Thai Institute? When was it started, and what is its mandate?
Sure. So folks may wonder why I know anything about this. I actually wrote my undergraduate thesis about the work of the Royal Institute.
There we go.
In undergrad, I guess 20 years ago now, almost 20 years ago now. And so as a wee lad in my early 20s, I spent some time with them and interviewed a bunch of folks. But it's changed a bit over the decades, right? So the Royal Institute's been around in various forms since the 20s, but it's been reorganized a whole bunch of times. 1920s, yeah. I guess now we have another 20s come around again.
We are old, sir.
But yeah, that's right. So I think officially the current incarnation began in the 30s, but it had predecessors. And so it sort of bounced around between being under the auspices of the Ministry of Education, actually predates the Ministry of Education to when there was the Department of Education was still the thing. And I think now it's still the case that it has become like a separate organization that sort of reports directly to the Prime Minister. And so their job is to basically be the academic experts for the government of Thailand. And so the most well-known work they do with respect to the language. If
I'm working at the Royal Institute, are there thousands of people in a big building somewhere, or is it like an office with a half a dozen guys and a computer? What does it look like?
It's between those two.
Okay.
So when I first went there, it was still housed on the grounds of the Royal Palace. I don't know. I can't remember if that was temporary or not. But they were building a new facilities, and so they're currently in a big, fancy, attractive building that was custom built for them around 10 years ago, and or rather opened sometime in the last 10 years or so, and. So that's in the Sanam Suapa area, sort of near old downtown, but in that general area. But when I first went, they were still on the grounds of the palace, and so it was just one of the buildings and had Royal Institute sign hung up, and it was just a big meeting room and a bunch of other small offices. But the number of full-time employees is not huge, but there's a whole lot of basically the bulk of the work, or at least the bulk of the numbers, are sort of the volunteers or the part-time people who are sitting on various committees and things. And so those are academics who are selected and nominated, and those are called fellows or members, depending on the status they receive. Yeah.
Are they all generally Thai people, or are there any?
Yeah, I think as far as I know, they're all Thai, and so it's sort of one of these things where academics who fit the qualifications are identified and their names are proposed to the Prime Minister, and it sort of goes up the chain, and ultimately they're appointed to become fellows of the Royal Academy by the King. But the name in Thai might be interesting for people to think about. It actually changed a few years back. I think 2015. It changed back to the name it originally had in the 30s. It's currently called Rajbanditya Sabha, which means the Royal Council. And that Rajbandit part, the Raj or Raja part, is like cognate with Raja, like Maharaja, right? So meaning royal or king. So that's the royal part. And the Bandit part is cognate with Pundit, which English has also borrowed. So Thai and English have that in common, that they have borrowed the word from Sanskrit.
Cool.
Yeah. So it basically means like the royal pundits, but really in this case, it's more maybe closer to translated as just the Society of Royal Fellows, right?
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, in the same way that we think of like, you're like a Guggenheim Fellow or something like that, right? Fellow just in this sense means scholar.
Right. Yeah. So that's the name it has now. What was the name?
So from like the 30s until 2015, they called it Rajamadityya Satan, and Satan means like place. And so it was like the Royal Institute. So that was like the institute part. And so they decided to shift it back around to focus on like it is a council of learned people, and let's focus on like the institute as a location.
Oh, okay.
And so anyway, it's sort of an on paper name change, I guess, but there probably are some other perhaps technical changes that went along with that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's made up of a bunch of different committees there's like dictionary committees and different committees who work on coining terms for different academic subfields. And it's just a whole lot of people who know a whole lot about a lot of things. And their job is one of the big ones is to produce the dictionary that everyone is sort of familiar with. Yeah.
The first time I heard about them was when someone told me that, I mean, the word for computer in Thai that probably all foreigners know is com-pu-TER. And that's the joke, is that whenever you want to translate an English word to Tinglish, you just say it like that. Expressway, McDonald, whatever, And someone told me that actually there's a real officially sanctioned word for computer, and it's not computer.
Yeah, I might have told you that.
Maybe you did. This is going. I mean, we've been doing these shows for 10 years now.
The people who are listening to the earlier episodes can tell me which episode I told Greg that.
Someone go back and listen to episode.
It would have been years ago now, but yeah, no, the official. That's one of their jobs. You said something earlier that I guess I should correct, which that Thailand isn't unique per se in having a royal institute, because they model themselves on the French Academy, which does a similar thing for French.
Oh, okay. I had no idea.
So in the 30s, that's what they were looking at. They were looking at, okay, well, the French have this academic body whose job is to sort of keep the language pure and up to date and come up with French equivalents for English words, so we don't have to use English. That's the kind of the same idea behind it.
Dirty foreigners.
But in that regard, when there are the need for terms in the academic sphere that exist in English, that's one of the things that many of the committees do, is come up with a Thai equivalent. And of course, what they're doing is they're coining words from Indic roots. And so it may seem a little funny that, well, if they're coming up with new Thai words, but they're actually are using words that they borrowed from Sanskrit and Bali, how are they Thai? But I mean, it's Sanskrit and Bali have been a part of Thai for many, many, many hundreds of years, and sort of hold the same role in Thai that like Latin and Greek do for English, where the learned vocabulary comes from there. And so it's seen as being preferable to have those words rather than just use the English.
Right.
Anyway, so to make a long story short, yes, kanitagon is the word that they came up with for computer.
Kanitagon.
Kanit is a word that means math, and gon means like a machine, right? Another word that uses that same gon root would like patigon is like reactor, like a nuclear reactor. So you'll see it in the names of different kinds of machines. But kanitagon, so a counting machine, a computing machine.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Literally a computer.
Yeah, literally a computer. Well, I guess originally computers were humans in English also.
Yes, exactly.
But yes. The age when they had become machines, Thai was coining that term.
Right.
But yeah, some of the terms that they have put forth just don't end up catching on. And so even though their official mandate is to be prescriptive and to come up with these terms and to sort of ensure the advancement of the national standard language, right, then sometimes words don't catch on. And, that's just what happens sometimes.
My question then is, if the sort of popular vote is going to determine what's used in colloquial everyday language, do these institutes need to exist anymore? Especially with technology being what it is and connecting so many people now. Do they have a place still?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do a lot of really valuable work. For one thing, to find someone who's willing to put in the amount of work to just like put together a dictionary of a language is not an easy task, because it's not, unless you can find someone who's convinced they can make money off of it, like a commercial publisher, you do need things like government funding to support work like that. And so, although, you know, to compare to the French case again, like the French Academy can be viewed by the French public as sometimes a little bit out of touch and maybe a little
stale.
Yeah, I don't know. Trying not to misstate it or be disrespectful, but there's still, you know, there's still a role there, and to have government support for that kind of academic work is never a bad thing, in my opinion. You know, the converse is, you know, you could imagine it would take a lot of money to convince my government back home in the U.S. to fund like a dictionary of that scale, and that's why private companies have largely done that work back home. And so, yeah.
So when a new word comes along, like maybe it's existed, I'm just trying to think of new words that have sort of really are on everyone's mind these days: cryptocurrency, transgender, quantum. What would be the process for the Royal Society in Thailand to say, hey, we got this new word that everyone's using, we need to address this? What happens next?
Well, there's a bunch of different committees for different subfields. So there would be a committee, I don't know in the particular case, but, you know, it would get on some committee's agenda for lists of words that need equivalents, and there are different coining committees that would then come up with things. And I don't know the details so well that I know exactly how that approval process happens, but I mean, that's the idea. And eventually what happens is you get these sort of lists of subject field specific dictionaries that are produced and maintained. So those, you know, I know there's one for linguistics, and there's one for legal terms, and there's one for all kinds of things. What's the equivalent in these things? And the main thing to note about the Royal Institute Dictionary and all of the other works they produce is they have a legal mandate to use them in official works of the government. So that's the place where you'll see them used. So even in things that it still may be more popular in colloquial speech to use the English word with, you know, Thai phonology on top of it, you'll still see it used in formal writing.
So if I was reading a government document about technology, would they have the word Kanitikon, or would they use computer? I think
eventually, if something doesn't catch on for a long enough time, they retire it. So I'm pretty sure com-pu-TER might have won that battle. Because we're talking about that would have been happening in like the 70s or 80s, right? Like that would have been a long time ago now. That first needing a term for computer, maybe even before that. I don't know exactly when, but so yeah, I think after a certain point. If the English loan is popular, it might win out. But yeah, you'll certainly find terms in official works that you might not hear them in speech as much, for sure.
Right. How much of Thai language is influenced and changed by popular culture, by pressure from the outside, by America projecting its soft power around the world? I mean, you know, like what's hip and cool with the kids will eventually become much more common and widely spoken. And does it go the other way? Does that then influence the Royal Institute? Do they sort of take a reading of where the tide is and where the wind is blowing and say, okay, we need to adjust? Or
one thing that's important to notice about that is that that's a pretty universal human trend, which is to say that young people lead the charge in language change everywhere, and that all languages are always changing. And it was sort of an idea that died towards the end of the 19th century, at least among linguists, that there was like language used to be pure and has become corrupted. That was a sort of old-fashioned idea. And so popularly that hasn't always died out, right? People still love to say the young people are ruining the language, text speak. I found this great article from the mid-90s where they're saying AOL chat rooms are ruining the English language. And I'm like, now the people who grew up in AOL chat rooms are the ones saying texting and
all you can say is LOL.
It's not true. I mean, the fact that like the young people are ruining the language is like that whole thing is just it's a panic that is never ending, right?
That's interesting. So you as a professional linguist see that, like, you know, I think every generation complains. I complain about it. My son now says bruh. He goes bruh all the time. Bruh. He wants some hot dogs? Bruh. I would love hot dogs, right? Which is a memification of the word bro. Yeah. Like, bro, I would love some hot dogs. So, you know, it gets annoying as hell a lot of times, but I understand that that's just the way it works, right? And when I started saying, oh man, hey man, how's it going? Hey man, my mom used to complain about that too.
Yeah.
Like, don't call people man, it's not polite. I'm like, well, everyone does it, you know? So it's certainly nothing new, but as a professional linguist, you see that as healthy?
Yeah. So first of all, a lot of people get the idea. So, you know, I tell someone I'm a linguist, there's probably one of two things they're going to say next. One is, well, how many languages do you speak? That's pretty expected, because people think of it like, oh, you must study languages all day. Or really, so I sort of learn a toolkit for how to study the parts of any language. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm collecting more and more languages. Like, if you're a vet, you don't have to own 100 pets, right? You can just have 1 or 2 pets and still be a very good veterinarian. But the other thing they might say is, oh, better watch my grammar around you. Like, they think I'm, you know, here to correct everyone's grammar. And really, linguists are looking at it with a much more sort of like open and curious attitude towards like, well, what makes language tick? What makes languages, what do they have in common? And language change is one of the biggest things that languages have in common. And so, yeah, it's absolutely healthy. And it's also one of my, I don't know, it's one of the things I enjoy doing. College age people are great to ask, like, okay, so what's the word you use for when something is really great, or a song you really like? And so, you know, I've learned over the year, I've seen things come and go, like poggers and, you know,
Pogs. Oh my God.
That song is pogger. I don't even know how to use it correctly, but, you know, like the students get to teach me these things, and I get to embarrass myself by trying to use them and remember them.
Do your kids ever be like, Dad?
Yeah. Or like, that song slaps, stuff like that. So, you know, like, I get to learn these things, but that's the point, is that I ask them, because I get them, give students a chance to see that, like, oh, really, they're sort of on the forefront of language change in a way that it's just, society isn't designed where I am, that someone like me is on the cutting edge of new terminology.
Let's put the focus on the 40-year-olds. Everything should revolve around them.
To get back to your question, though, like, does that cycle back around and influence things? I mean, I think the computer example is one where, yeah, absolutely. In that sense, if it becomes influential enough, and if it is widespread enough, computer won that battle. And so sometimes, you know, what's popular can win out. Yeah.
It's really good and heartening to hear that they would say, like, you know, you often think of these bodies of these austere organizations as fuddy-duddy old men sitting in, you know, leather chairs around big oak tables. So it's good that they're flexible to a certain extent, because you need to be. I remember reading a while ago about, it was either Socrates or Plato, about he was complaining bitterly about books, so many books being literally written by hand. And he says, no one thinks anymore. They just read all the time. It's ridiculous.
You don't memorize the classics like we used to do in my day.
It's the ruin of society. You know, it goes back thousands of years.
Yeah, this is a trend. You know, like at the turn of the 20th century, they're complaining about the youths and their bicycles, able to locomote wherever they want to go. Now, so there's always something.
Special bicycle for girls.
Something
it would be immodest of them to ride with their legs. You know.
Right.
Let's talk about the Thai language then. I mean, you're a professor, and I guess you're not surrounded by Thai in the States as much as you would be here. But have you read about or heard about or been studying any trends in Thai recently? What are Thai linguists talking about these days?
It's a good question. I guess I want to highlight the really interesting work of Ajahn Pawadi Saisuwan, who does really interesting work on the Thai pronoun system. And so that's one that sort of fits in with modern trends, and I think is really interesting work about. Thai has a sort of famously complicated pronoun system where there's not an exact number, but there are, let's say, 17 ways to say I, right? When you meet someone, you can't just pick I. You have to know all kinds of things about the dimensions. And so she has done this really great work sort of analyzing things in terms of like familiarity and distance between you two and power. And so you're calculating age, right? Kinship, all kinds of things. And you're calculating these things on the fly as you go. And so that's a kind of like really interesting work that I think fits into how things are, what kind of things people are thinking about in English these days. Yeah.
I love the fact that there's a gu in Thai, like an impolite way to refer to yourself. I think that's fascinating, and I wish I could use it more often, but apparently it's rude.
Yeah, it is a fascinating one. One of the things that's fascinating about it is that it is actually the original Thai word for I. And so one of the things that's fascinating about the Thai pronoun system is that the sort of native words, the original words, became rude over time as they became replaced with fancier borrowings from other languages. Oh. And so the one that people have been using for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you can look at, the early inscriptions from 700-800 years ago, and like the king is referring to himself as gu because it wasn't impolite back then.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. I broached the idea of having a t-shirt made that would say gu chapai nai wa on the front, but my wife nixed that idea pretty quickly. So apparently she wouldn't want to be seen in public with someone wearing a garment of such a vulgar.
I'll bet there's plenty of shirts that say gu on them somewhere. So and you can probably buy them all at Chapter Jack.
So what you said about pronouns really piked something interesting with me was, there's no equivalent to the Royal Institute in English, as far as I know. Is there?
No, not in English.
An overarching society that tries guide language development. So it seems that the development of English, at least back in North America, is changing quickly. And, Ed and I on the show and with our friends often joke about how one of the reasons why we don't want to move back to North America is because we'd probably be canceled within a week of showing up, because we're just not used to how things have changed since we've been gone. And we'd probably say an offhand comment and be kicked out of our job or something like that. But, the language in North America is changing quickly. Pronouns being sort of the most famous example, he, she, him, he, him, things like that. So that seems to be developing a lot of the development of how people talk about themselves and other people in English. Is there something similar in Thai? Is there a movement or an undercurrent or a modernization of things along the same lines of identity and sexuality and gender and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a really different starting point, but so Thai has always had certain pronouns that were non-gendered, and in fact, the introduction of gender is somewhat recent for some terms. I'm actually advising a couple of students this summer who are working on a Thai pronoun project with me, where we're looking at the history and development of the system over the past 700 years, and sort of what were the social influences that led to changes. So one of the ways we know things about any language is we compare it to its closest relatives, right? So we know we by comparing languages, we know that German and English are closely related, and of course, like Spanish and French and Italian descended from Latin, that kind of thing. And so we could divide languages up into families and into branches within those families. And the way you can sort of figure out, well, what did the common ancestor of like the Germanic languages, or, with Latin is a different case because we actually have written records, right? But not so for most other families of the world. And you compare them, and that's how you can tell what things used to look like, is what do they have in common, and what did one language go off and do differently and split off and do its own thing.
Okay.
And so we can tell that Thai is actually the odd one out in its family compared to the other languages, because you look at, you compare Thai with its relatives in everywhere from South China down throughout mainland Southeast Asia, and they're all using much simpler pronoun systems. And so it's not new, but Thai has been doing this over the past several centuries, where sort of the increased stratification of society, the introduction of conversion to Buddhism, the sort of early stage of being of Khmer being like the prestige language 700 years ago before the fall of Angkor, and so that being like what the fancy people spoke in the same, like, after the Norman conquest, all the rich and fancy people spoke French in England.
Really? It was Khmer.
Yeah, and so Khmer was the prestige language for a couple of centuries in Southeast Asia, because they were here before the Thais showed up in this part of the world.
You're talking TAI.
Yeah, right. So all of those groups that migrated out of southern China. So what happened was Thai with the H, right? THAI, what we now know as like sort of Siam and its associated polities, political states, developed a sort of more complex system than the others. And so, like I say, it's not new, but the reason why we have this sort of such a different starting point from where English is because it was already taking in things from all these other languages around it. And so, in fact, one of the sort of what we find about the languages that sort of are the most quote unquote successful, I guess, in sort of, managing to gain sort of market share in the world's languages, right? So that become the language of a successful nation state and so on, is their adaptability, right? Is their ability to sort of absorb from neighbors. English has done the same thing, where it just absorbs everything like a sponge. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that Thai did, was it adapted and changed, and that makes it look different from its closest relatives in some sense, but more like its neighbors and others.
Okay. English in terms of non-gender pronouns, I guess it'd be they. Yeah. And I've heard of Z, XE.
Yeah. So English has those are, so the like Z, zero, those things are called neopronouns sometimes, right? Where they're pronouns that have been sort of created for non-gendered use, whereas they, them has been used in English in the singular sense for at least since Chaucer's time.
Mm-hmm, right.
So we have records going back, 500, 600 years. I know, right? Well, when he wasn't busy writing bawdy tales full of innuendo,
whenever
he was using singular they.
Whenever I hear the word body, the only thing I think of is Chaucer. What are the non-gendered pronouns in Thai then?
Well, so the basic set that you have in Thai, like Kao, the third person, right, is not gendered. Kun, you is not gendered. And so really it's in the first person, where the ones people think of, like the textbook pronouns, pom and dichan, like the very polite ones, those are actually fairly recent.
Really?
Yeah, and we know this because none of the languages related to Thai have versions of those pronouns. Those are Thai innovations. And so pom, the male pronoun, wasn't a male pronoun until the last 100 years or so.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And dichan, which is the female one, wasn't a female pronoun until around the turn of, we see it first mentioned. This is one of the things we've been looking at this summer, is when does it stop getting mentioned just in terms of like polite and start getting mentioned in terms of gender. And so we found, I think the first reference is like an 1892 dictionary where it's mentioned as being female gendered for the first time. And so it must have been around the late 19th century.
Wow. Where
that started to change. And so, yeah, gender as a sort of a feature of the pronoun system can also be the new kid on the block in the sort of long-term language change scale of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Have there been any other words to address the sort of recent emergence of transgenderism as an identity? I guess maybe backing up a step, we would have to ask, is the sort of that battle that we see in the West, is that coming to Thailand, or has it already been in Thailand?
I don't want to act like I can speak totally authoritatively on this, but this is why.
Come on, two straight white guys talking about LGBTQ issues?
Right,
come on.
In Thailand. But this is why I mentioned that John Pawadi's work, because her work is actually about indexing of femininity by the term that Thais use, gatui, and the term that she uses in English for that is non-gender conforming men. And so, or non-gender, there's a variety of terms, but this sort of the nearest Thai equivalent to transgender women. One of the things that she found in her work that's interesting is that the frequency among like the set of recordings that she made and the study she did, like the rate of frequency of using the term dichan, like the heavily feminine gendered pronoun, is higher among transgender women than other women, and which is an interesting finding, right? Because the point is you specifically want to index your femininity among that group,
right?
So this is not super new work. I think she started doing this survey around 10 years ago and published it in her dissertation several years back now, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of interesting finding that some people sort of chafe against the gendered side of things and would prefer just to not have to index gender as a feature of pronouns. So I did an interview for Thai Inquirer a couple of years back, where the author was a young Thai woman who was sort of miffed about the fact that, why do men have pom and women, you're either picking dichan, which makes you sound like you're in your 50s, or you're using nu, which makes you sound like you're calling yourself a child, and like chan sounds too familiar. And so there really is like a discrepancy, and John Pawadi's work sort of shows this, that there is a pronoun that cuts across all these things on the male side, which is pom, which is sort of a kind of class neutral way of referring to yourself, and that there is a discrepancy there. And so maybe something will emerge. And Chun is like the closest competitor. But the interesting fact is, I mentioned that the Chun wasn't originally a female gendered pronoun. Well, Chun has been an abbreviation for it for well over 100 years also. And so it has stayed non-gendered sort of all throughout that history. And so Chun still remains non-gendered.
I guess one could argue there's also sort of a patriarchal tinge to Miss and Mrs. and just having Mr. to cut across all of that. There's no change in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not, I think the way I put it in the article is like, yeah, there could be a sort of infantilizing element of that by design, right? So I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that these things are designed that way, because the fact that Pom and Di Chun are the prescriptively correct, like sort of formal male-female pronouns was again an act of like a government body deciding that that's how those things should be, just in the way that Krop and Ka were mandated by the government as like the polite way to use Thai in the 1940s, but that was not something that developed organically.
Right. Also eat this pad Thai, which we just made.
Yeah, in fact, that's a whole other interesting. You could do an entire podcast about that kind of sort of attempts to shape language by various military bodies and powers over the years.
Right. We'll have to have you back then and come talk about that military influence over language, soft power, culinary influence over culture.
Don't forget the Korean soft power. That's another one that's come up recently.
Yeah, and they've cracked the code, man. I feel creepy every time I walk by a TV in a mall and there's like 16 Korean girls dancing on stage, and they've just nailed the lighting, the makeup, the fashion, the moves so perfectly. And I want to appreciate it as sort of a soft power move by the South Korean government, but also appreciate that I'm a creepy old guy staring at a TV going, wow. So I try not to do that.
So you're not buying Blackpink tickets, concerts?
No. I think I was talking with my colleagues earlier about, do you know Baby Metal?
I do not.
Listeners, if you have not heard of Baby Metal, check them out. They're three young Japanese girls who do some really hardcore thrash metal, and it's awesome. And they came to Bangkok recently, but I'm like, there's no way I'm going to a Baby Metal concert. It's just a bad look. Someone will take a picture and I'll be all in the newspaper or something. Anyway, Rikker, thank you, man. Really interesting. I love your historical insight and cultural insight. It really adds some texture to learning about Thailand and the culture. So I appreciate it a lot, and hope to see you on your next trip through.
Yeah, thanks again for having me here.
10 years. Long time, baby.
Let's make it another 10.
All right.
Man, I really enjoyed that. I got to admit, I didn't know anything about the Royal Society. Like, I just didn't even know it existed, I don't think.
I don't think it's something that normal plebs like you and I would know, right? Like, unless you're really studying high-level Thai,
right?
Why would you know anything about it? But it's very interesting that it exists, and it's been around for so long, and it's kind of cool, I think, what it does. I think it's sort of a retro throwback to keeping things, maybe pure is the wrong word, but, original, old school.
Right. I understand why they exist and what they're doing, but I don't know. I kind of like this idea of language just being organic and just letting it go. I understand why the government doesn't want that to happen, but I don't know. What's your take? I mean, do you think the project is, okay, so now we understand it, but do you think it's a good idea?
Well, I think the thinking behind it is interesting. Like, if you're dealing with something like English or Spanish, which is spoken by, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world, then it's impossible. It's a hopeless cause. But if you're dealing with a language like Thailand, which is essentially mostly useless outside of Thailand,
right?
Then I think that probably it makes more sense to try and sort of, if not control, then at least have a say in how it develops.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, languages can disappear. Thousands of languages have disappeared. Right. And I certainly understand why a government or a society or a culture, they would not want their language to disappear. So I certainly understand that.
Yeah, and Rikker was a good guy to talk about this because I can't remember if we mentioned it in the interview, but one of the things he does when he's here on his research trips is he heads up like deep into the mountains of northern Burma and
I remember that.
Thailand.
Yep. I remember that.
And he like tracks down the one dude in his village who still speaks this one dialect that's nearly gone.
And then he kills him. Wipes
he
him
takes
out.
the power of the language.
The last
he absorbs
speaker.
it. That's right. It's like the quickening from Highlander. No, but he records him and sort of interviews him and learns all about this language and saves it for posterity, which is really cool. So,
Rikker, superhero of the Thai language.
Super linguist, SL on his chest. It was always a great time to sit down with Rikker. He's a really, really cool guy, and I appreciate the time he gave me on his very busy vacation visit back to Thailand. So thanks, Rikker. That was really cool. And next time you come back to Thailand, let us know. I will trap you in another room with another microphone, and we'll talk about something else equally as cool.
For sure.
Right. All right, let's do something that we call Would You Rather, where one of us picks two contrasting situations tied to Thailand to debate and choose which one we'd prefer. And this week, Ed, I'm going to ask you something.
Alrighty, hit me.
Well, this one comes from our buddy Andy, and he sent this to me a little while ago. And I thought it was quite interesting. Now, Ed, I think it's quite well known, and this is broadly speaking, but I think Thailand, we can say, compared to the West, has fewer vacation days available for people who work, but more public holidays than Western countries. So my question is, would you rather have more public holidays and less vacation days like in Thailand, or less holidays and more vacation days like in the West?
Okay, interesting question. First of all, this question of more or fewer vacation days is kind of tricky. I think the U.S., because it's so unregulated, I think it's more countries like Canada and Europe, like you socialist countries, you guys have more, like companies have to give more. You have to give 6 weeks of vacation or something like that. Like most of Americans, I think, have measly, might have 2 weeks of vacation.
No, I think, when I grew up, it was always 2 weeks vacation. That's what you got. 2 weeks.
Oh, maybe Canada. Yeah. Maybe Canada's different.
Europeans have it right. They've got like 9 weeks of vacation a year.
Yeah, crazy. But it's absolutely correct that Thailand has a huge number of government holidays. It's kind of crazy, and typically I don't have to teach on those days, but I have to make up the classes. So to me, I always have mixed feelings about these government holidays because it's like I don't have to go to work that day, but I have a certain number of hours I have to teach for the course anyway. So it's kind of mixed blessings. But yeah, it's a good question. I guess
from what I know about Thai labor laws, I think at least the last job I had for a very Thai company, you get 6 days vacation per year.
To be honest, I don't even know because I have breaks between the semesters that are fairly long. I presume that's my vacation. So I don't even know what legally vacation I'm due, because I just have breaks between the semester that take care of that. So it's not like I'm not allowed to take vacation like in the middle of the semester and just be like, hey, next week I'm not going to be here, I'm on vacation. I can't do that.
Yeah, right. You've got a fairly unique position there.
Yeah.
But, for my old job, it was 6 days. And of course, there was some flexibility around that. And I think most Thai companies are a bit more flexible.
Well, here's the way I look at the problem. On the one hand, having more vacation is a little more flexible because then you can use it whenever you want, or at least have some freedom when it's used. But, one thing that's cool about government holidays is that it's a community thing. And so that, this weekend's going to be a 3 or 4 day weekend and there's going to be a million people out. So it's kind of like everyone is off at the same time, which could have an advantage. But, I'm getting old. I'm not so into crowds. So I think I would rather have the vacation days, which I guess is the typical Western thing. I'd rather have vacation days than government holidays, I think. I don't know. What's your take?
I think I agree with you, but I will say it's really nice. It's like in Thailand, almost every month has at least one long weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's so many government holidays. Yeah. Right.
Some have none. Others have like 3. But I think it's nice to have something to look forward to. And maybe that says something about my work ethic, but it's always nice to be like, a couple more weeks and there's a long weekend,
That's right. That's right.
But the flexibility of having your own vacation days is is pretty nice too.
Yeah, I mean, I get your point. There's not very many long stretches without any vacation. Like when I'm looking at my teaching schedule, I mean, sometimes I bet I could probably find 4 weeks in a row with no holiday, but I bet that happens maybe once a year. Where it's like, oh my God, I got 4 weeks with no holiday. There's there's almost always usually. Almost every month there's a holiday, like you said. There might be like one, or I could find a 4 week stretch where there's no holiday. So I do appreciate it where it's like, cool, I get an extra day off, even though I usually have to make it up. But I still think, yeah. I mean, there's so many things about Europe, especially Northern Europe, that is it's hard to get, it's hard for Americans to get their heads around, having 6 weeks or more weeks of vacation. That's just something that I can't even process. It's just not an American thing. So I can't, it reminds me of Michael Moore in, what was his movie on healthcare that he did?
Sicko.
Yeah, Sicko. When he went to like a hospital in London, run by the NHS, and he's trying to find like where you pay your bill, and it's kind of it's a gag, but he can't find the counter where you pay your bill, and eventually he finds a small little counter that says cashier, and he goes up to the cashier and he's like, oh, okay, so this is where I pay my bill, and the person is like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, it says cashier. It's like, so I pay my bill here, and they're like, there's no bill, and he's like, well, what do you do then? And he's like, oh, this is where we compensate you for your transportation. So if you have like your receipt from the tube or something, like we pay you for your transportation. And Michael Moore's head is like exploding. Like as an American, you're like, wait, you're going to pay me? You're going to give me money for going to the hospital? I feel that way about, extensive vacation. It's such a European
I read a
thing.
similar story. I already read a similar story about an American who moved to Germany, I think it was, and she went to her company, and then she's like, how many sick days do I get? And they're like, what do you mean? She's like, well, how many sick days am I allowed a year? And we go, if you're sick, you stay home.
Right.
That's
depends on how often you're sick. We don't know. We don't know how often you're going to be sick.
Yeah. Anyway, but one thing I do like about these mandated government holidays is that if you time it right in certain months, you can take like 5 days vacation and end up having like 14 days off work, if you like string it between long weekends and
sure. Oh yeah.
Time it right.
Yeah. It's definitely weird the way the schedule works out.
Yeah. But I think vacation days, I prefer having those under my own control.
Yeah. The flexibility for sure.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks, Andy.
All right. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping on our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
That's right. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail through our website that will feature on the show. I'm off Twitter these days, but you can now find me on Threads at BKKGreg. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you back here next week.
For sure.
I'm straight, right?
I've heard, allegedly.
I do like the ladies, but I gotta say, man, did you watch Stranger Things?
I actually only watched the whole first season. I know there's like four seasons?
4, yeah, I think so, and another one on the way. But anyway,
Don't tell me there's a dude in there you liked.
Dude's handsome, man. Dacre Montgomery. For some reason, his picture came up on some cast photo I was looking at. I'm like, that is a handsome man.
That reminds me of Louis C.K. and who is he?
Ewan McGregor.
Ewan McGregor. He's like, he's beautiful. He's beautiful. He's a beautiful person.
Yeah. Hey, man, I just like beauty in all its forms. That's all I'm saying.
That's right. That's right.
All right.